All right, everybody, listen, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know everyone's so busy, and I know there's a lot of successful agents on this call, and for you to take time out of your day, it means a lot. I aim not to disappoint and exceed your expectation of what this is. I'm not going to spend any time giving you my history. Some of you that know me, those that don't know me, I've been doing this my whole life. I've been as lucky and as fortunate as you can possibly be in the real estate business. And for the last literally 17 years, I've been I don't like to say training. I think training is what you get in the zoo. I consider myself to be more of a motivational sales strategist. And I've really been helping advise and direct agents and companies to kind of do better in the business, and obviously with a focus on listings. So the reason why I wanted to do this webinar is that I watch social media, as I'm sure all of you do. I read, I've been listening. And, what has just been so shocking to me, and I thought I never could be shocked, is the shock of the reaction of the industry, to this litigation, and what's more interesting to me is that back in 2019, when this case was filed, okay, it was filed, pre-COVID, and if you read the case, which I know a lot of people didn't read it, but what was more interesting to me was how many industry leaders, successful agents, discounted this from even becoming a reality, right? It was almost, I said, it was like the look of an overconfident prize fighter about this case. And so I don't want to talk much about this case, but we have to just mention it because I want to talk about what to do with it and how to respond. But the denial, the lack of interest in it over these years was really shocking. But what was even more shocking was when the jury kind of rendered the verdict on Halloween, and it came out as not that many people expected it to come out. I expected it to come out that way. You had, again, shock, can't believe it, unbelievable. But then what happened was even worse. Industry leaders, agents across the board were like, you know what? We still don't have to worry about it. This thing is going to last for years. There's going to be an appeal. It'll never be, it'll be years before we deal with it. And again, many leaders, many smart people discounted it. Even though there was a verdict, they said, it'll never happen. And all these defendants would never settle. And this was the narrative on this case. No one did anything. And then on March 15th, when NAR settled, all of a sudden you had this, what's this case? But even since March 15th, the venom, the denial, the doom and gloom, the grim reaper reaction on the part of the industry was, quite frankly, and is so disappointing because it doesn't have to be that way. And I believe a lot of agents are not really the ones we need to point our fingers at. It's leadership. Why is leadership allowing this kind of negative thing to filter in? And again, so what I wanted to do was to kind of share, because I've been sharing about this thing since 2019. We've been recalibrating our business for years, kind of getting ready for this major change. And again, the recalibration from the buyer side to the listing side wasn't because buyer agents don't have value. It wasn't because, but it just was, listen, we don't know how this thing is going to pan out. We don't know if this plaintiff will win, but if they do, be prepared. And even if the plaintiff failed in their case, let's say the jury went the other way, what would anybody have lost in recalibrating their business to have more of a focus on the listing side of this business? Because there is one area of the listing business, there's one area of the real estate business which remains to this day highly opportunistic. Most agents don't go there, and it's called prospecting for listings outside your sphere of influence. This is virgin territory as far as I'm concerned in every market you go to, because every market I go to, and I bounce all over the place, I always ask agents, how many people proactively go out there and prospect for listings and prospect for business outside their sphere? A few hands always go up. I could be in an office of 100 people, there'll be 5 hands. I could be in a market with 9,000 realtors, there'll be 50 that do it. So the idea is that this case, this thing, is an incredible opportunity. I have been doing this my whole life. There's been a couple of big changes historically. We had the historical change of sub-agency. If anybody was around, you remember the buyer's agent was never a buyer's agent. They were a sub-agent of the listing agent, right? They were a sub-agent. That went away. Everyone was concerned. They created buyer agents. Now there were buyer agents and listing agents. Fast forward to the next major change. You had Zillow coming on the landscape. Every realtor on the planet was concerned that the MLS data was going to be available for the public to see. Everyone was nervous because now the public has access to our information. It's over. It's the end of the world. We're done. That didn't change either. In fact, agents actually became better. We empowered consumers. And even though consumers were empowered with our information, they still needed the agent's assistance. So there's been a lot of changes. This change, however, is different. And all this change does, and I really kind of want to unpack this for the simplicity that it is, because with everything you're reading about this case, all the pages and pages of narrative information, this is a pretty simple case. And what does it really mean? The first thing it means is that we have the unlocking, right? The word decoupling, right? But it's really a disconnect. It's an unlock because the powers that be in our industry, and this was done with thought, this was done with intent, knew that if we didn't somehow, and remember, NAR is a realtor organization. It's not a consumer organization. They knew they had to protect the very lifeblood of our business, which is commissions. And this participation rule, this cooperation agreement was designed with intent. It meant that it would allow buyers agents to continue to have commissions. It would allow them to protect it. And it was done with design. But the uncoupling of the dislocking of this is really simplistic. And what does it really mean? It means now for the first time ever, just like listing agents had to do three things for the past 90 years. And what did a listing agent have to do for the past 90 years? You had to articulate your value to your seller. Number two, you had to determine and agree and obtain a term in which you were going to be hired for. And three, you had to articulate your compensation. And you did that amongst other competition, right? Listing agents have always been competing against listing agents based on those three dynamics. And at the end of the day, the seller has options. And sellers have the ultimate options, from doing it on their own as a FSBO to working with a variety of listing service providers, right? Some that are discount brokers, some that are flat fee providers, some agents that are premium, but sellers have just had that choice, at least on the listing side, right? Sellers have the choice. Now I'm going to get to the cooperation thing in a second, but let's look at the buyer side of this business. For as long as we can remember, buyer's agents, they have value, right? We do things, but there's three things that a buyer agent never had to do. The buyer agent never had to compete on commission, right? A buyer never came to you with any level of frequency and said, listen, I want to go see a house, but before we go see that house, before we go there, talk to me about how much you're earning. How much is the listing agent or the seller paying you? Oh, they're paying you 2.5. You know what? Before we go see it, I'm really not happy with you getting 2.5. I only think you're worth 2. Agents never had commission conversations with buyers before you went and showed them a house. In fact, one would make the argument the buyers didn't even really understand what the compensation and how you got paid. They kind of knew it was in there. It was in the price. Did they pay? Didn't they pay? I can't find 5 people to agree whether the buyer's agents pay commissions or sellers. The point is you had confusion and you had lack of transparency. So compensation. Most buyer's agents never sat down and went through all their value proposition. And by the way, most buyer agents never committed buyers to lock in for a period of time. So the very thing that listing agents have had to do forever, buyer agents have never had to do that until now. So the first thing that this lawsuit brings us and brings agents, at least on the buy side of this equation, is for the first time ever, you're going to have to do something new. You're going to have to do 3 things. You're going to have to articulate your value to your potential buyer. You're going to have a discussion on term. Is this for one home? Is this for a period of time? And then you're going to have a conversation about compensation. And for the first time, a buyer is going to have to make that determination. Are you worth it? Is what you're saying to me worth what you're offering? And this is going to be healthy. Now, the first thing in question is, who's it healthy for? It's a free market. And in free markets, when markets become free, when any controlled market is opened up to the marketplace, what happens if you look at every industry, every situation, anytime a market was opened up to a consumer, two things happen. Number one, there's usually some kind of price compression because that's the way our world works. People compete on price. But the second thing that happens is efficiency goes up because everyone knows that the more you have to compete on efficiency and price, the better it will get. And the customer will then navigate to the place, hopefully, that provides both things. So from the consumer's perspective, buyers, in my view, will be victorious in this thing. Now, again, the industry has not supported this view. The industry supports the view that buyers are going to be hurt. Sellers are going to be hurt. And this whole narrative of people getting hurt just flies in the face of common sense and flies in the face of free market realities. Now, what have we learned? We've learned that after 50 years, sellers who've had unbelievable options to choose, from FSBO all the way to a premium provider, what do we know? Sellers have gravitated, by and large, to premium providers because a listing agent still has, as proven for over 50 years, high value to a seller. Now, remember, seller representation is different than buyer representation. And why have sellers continued overwhelmingly with all the technology, all the transparency, all the tools that are there? Why do they continue to navigate to high prior premium listing agents? Because being a listing agent is a different skill set. You're not just representing a person, you're representing a property. It's a tangible asset. Inside of that tangible asset, there's lots of things that are happening. Representations on a tangible asset are different than just a tangible representation on a person. So as a listing agent, you're representing a tangible asset, but what you're also representing, and the reason why sellers will pay the premium, is because sellers have a much more focused view of their ROI, their return on investment. Sellers have made an investment in an asset. And now that they're looking to sell it, the strategies, the solutions, the unique value propositions that you can deliver as a listing agent to a seller all goes into a seller's ROI determination, okay? So listing agent value to properties and homeowners, it's a completely different dynamic than to a homeowner, and we'll get to that in a second. So if you're looking for what I call the safe path for the future, if you're an agent and you're saying to yourself, God, where is the upside of my income? How do I protect my revenue? What can I do to go in the direction of upside revenue? The answer, at least for me in the world I navigate in, is you've got to make a decision today that you're going to prospect for listings like you've never prospected them before. Remember, most of you, some of you, there's an expression called sphere of influence. You're told, you're coached, you're mentored to work your sphere. I think it's one of the worst pieces of advice you can give an agent, especially a new one, because most people's sphere of influence is limited. And if you really want to have unlimited income, you got to go into markets that are unlimited, which are all those other markets I mentioned. That is where there's always opportunity. So on the listing side, we know we have complete safety if you go out there and do it. So the understanding of this case is simply the concept of creating a free market for buyers to decide and determine what they're getting themselves into, right? And then the other major concept, which again is fought like a demon by the industry, would be who pays for it, right? It's just been accepted that sellers have funded the buyer agent experience. It's that simple. Sellers, for as long, the way it was designed, right? Sellers was the funding source of the buyer agent commission. And you have to ask yourself, why is that, right? And while I don't want this to turn into a debate, although we're going to take questions at the end, when you think about it, the reason why sellers have always been that funding source is of a couple of reasons. Number one, they've got the equity pool in order to be able to do it, right? They're equity positioned to be able to do it, but they also had words coming out of the mouth of listing agents that even to this day is unethical. It's always been unethical. It's always been improper. Unfortunately, what I'm going to say to you has never been policed before. And you all know what it is. You'd sit in the home of a homeowner. You would convince them of your value proposition, but these words would come out of the mouth of most listing agents. And by the way, many of you, it's not your fault. This is what you were taught. You'd say to the seller, you know, now we have to talk about how much we're going to, give the buyer agent. Now, some listing agents never even talked about the buyer agency compensation. They would simply sell their 4, 5, 6% or whatever commission they did. And even though sellers signed a document showing the split, many sellers didn't even really go there. They didn't really challenge you on it. They never questioned you and picked it apart. But even to those who did, there were words that were said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and even if you didn't say the words, you need to offer out a premium commission. Because if you want to, and this is the word, incentivize buyer agents, you got to pay. You got to pay. Now, remember, sellers are being influenced by their listing agent. And many, many sellers, in fact, the majority of sellers would do that. But there were sellers who would push back. There were sellers who would say, well, what if I don't do that? What if I don't offer that premium commission? This is the other terrible thing you'd hear in the industry. Well, if you don't do that, if you don't offer out 2.5, 3, if you don't offer out the premium what the marketplace bears, you may not get the best price. Buyer agents won't have a reason to bring. Buyer agents won't even bring their buyers. And realtors would say this with pride. I would do meetings and realtors would get up and scream, I'm not going to show a listing if there's not enough in it for me. Unethical, inappropriate. No one said a word. This is just how this industry operated with complete non-self-policing. I mean, this is an industry that has a foundation built on a code of ethics, right? Everyone's got a pin, code of ethics. It's built on code of ethics, and ethics were violated in the open forum. No one said a word. No one said a word. Because that's kind of how it was, right? And let me tell you something. As an agent, this is good. No one's policing me, right? But what did that mean? It meant that sellers, of course, they had choices. That's what you hear coming out from you. You had choices. No one forced you. Yeah, no one forced me, but they said kind of if I didn't do it, if I didn't pay to play, And so what did this case do? Freedom. Sellers are no longer required. The cuffs are off. Freedom, right? Now, there's no little hints. We're going to talk about the hints that just happened, but the reality is, took it out of the equation. And the concept that the MLS and our sharing principles would result in a no commission offered. Think about it. Take a listing. There's no more. In most of your MLSs, the field will be deleted. You don't even have to worry about putting in a 0. Gone. So what does that mean? It means now, for the first time ever, sellers are not being, in my view, held hostage, strongly suggested, influenced, at least. But when you think about the commission, just for a minute, as a listing agent, there's some great listing agents on this call, and I see who they are. And I want you to think about this for a second. You probably went on a listing appointment and you probably articulated your 5 or 6 or your premium commission, whatever that was, and the seller rejected you for whatever reason. And you might have driven home going, you know what, I lost this because I couldn't overcome the commission objection. They went with somebody cheaper. Understand, when you were sitting in that living room or kitchen, showing and trying to get your premium commission, it wasn't your premium commission that you were fighting for. You were fighting for the commission of a buyer agent who you did not know. You were fighting for a commission of a buyer agent that could have been in this business for 30 seconds or 30 years. You were fighting for a buyer commission without even knowing what the offer is. It actually was crazy. Think about that. You were putting out a commission before you even know a who, what, where, anything. It's like me saying to you, listen, give me $50,000 and I'll give you a car. What do you mean? Once you agree to the 50, you got to entertain my car. But what made that crazier, this predetermined amount on an unknown agent and an unknown offer. Let me tell you why it was even crazier. Because let's just say you did it. You put that amount out there and you got an offer on your listing and you negotiated a transaction. And the buyer agent did what many buyer agents do. Not all of them, and I don't even believe most of them, but many of them drop the ball. Any listing agent on this call, I'm sure, could recant many, many times where they were paying a commission to a buyer's agent and the buyer agent dropped the ball. But you had a responsibility to that seller to get it to closing. And I know many of you picked up the ball for the lousy, bad buyer agent to get that thing to closing. And you know what that buyer agent got? Do you know what they were rewarded with at the end of their abandoned relationship with their buyer? Full commission. And by the way, you know who couldn't even argue about it? The buyer. Buyer had no ability to even renegotiate it. And you know who else couldn't do it? The seller, the very one who was funding it. And you know who else couldn't do it? The listing agent who put it out there, because once it's out there, you're done. As a buyer's agent, in the world of buyer agency, yes, being a buyer's agent isn't easy. Yes, it's a lot of time. I don't want to devalue it, but it's different. It had a different set of rules, a different set of circumstances. It didn't allow the free market to work the way it should work. So what does this now do? It frees the seller from a pre-mandated commission offer. And now the seller can sit back and have their property marketed and have buyers come to their world, which we'll talk about in a second. But now a seller with their listing agent can determine how they're going to navigate negotiations either with or without a commission offer. Now, in this case, it's very, very important to understand some realities. So number one, no more offers of compensation, at least within the MLS. Number two, if a buyer agent wants to see a home, no more meeting them at the property, no more sending them down, go see the house, tell the listing agent I'm your agent. No more of that. All those sloppy practices. Now you're going to have to sit down with your buyer and have a conversation never had before. Just kind of like what listing agents do. What's your value proposition? What do you do for me? How much do you charge me? And what's the term? And if you can articulate that, that's great. And buyers will have choices. But the idea is that it's, and the suggestion that has come out in this business is that somehow if buyer agents can't get their fee from the buyer, because the buyer's now going to have to fund it himself, but this settlement or proposed settlement, it's not official yet, still has one little window open that every realtor is all excited about. And you can see it online. They're like, hey, the good news is the seller can still offer compensation directly to the buyer's agent. They can still do it. Woo! Woo! That was close. Hold on a second. Understand that if you're thinking that nothing's going to change because the seller can still offer compensation, you don't need training. You need therapy. Massive amounts of it. Because sellers, first off, you can't find a homeowner right now that hasn't heard something about a change in the business. Now, I know everyone's, the media's got it wrong. The media's got it wrong. And yes, they have. And I got you. But it's not about the media getting it wrong or right. They just know something's up with commissions, okay? It's not like they don't know. Something's up. They don't know what it is. Something's up. So when you go on your listing appointment, you're going to have this conversation. Now, you could go down the road and you're going to have to explain to people that, hey, let me tell you what it is. You don't have to offer a commission. However, you still can. Now, if you say to sellers the following, listen, look around, you're going to say, listen, even though we are not allowed to offer compensation, you can still offer compensation. We can't offer it through the MLS, but you know what? It's a good idea if you do. Because if you do, if you offer compensation, you're going to sell your house for more money. You're going to get more buyers. If you go down that road, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be up against a well-trained listing agent who's going to beat you mercifully every time. Because what you should be saying to a seller is there's no need to offer compensation. Now, first, let me talk about that. It used to be your responsibility. It used to be, but I want to tell you the way real estate works in 2024. And it's worked this way for a long time, but now you're free. Buyers, and we know 97% of them shop for homes online. No percent shops for realtors as a buyer. They're shopping for homes. They find the home they want to see. When they find the home they want to see, they have a couple of options. They can click on some portal, whether it's Zillow or some other service, to click on an unknown agent to show it to them. They could call their friend who they know is a realtor who's been sending them recipe magnets for the past 12 years. Or they can call us directly. The good news is that buyers have a lot of options. And if you're concerned that you need to offer compensation to get buyers to your home, whoever you're talking to, it's from a time when there was no Wi-Fi, no internet, no nothing. Buyers, there's total transparency in the marketplace for buyers. If you think otherwise, I don't know what planet you are. Now, is it true that there are buyers who rely on their buyer's agent for everything? Yes. Is it true that there's some buyers who only get anything? They listen to their buyer's agent. If the buyer's agent says jump, they jump. Yes. But that's the very small percentage of the buyer population. We know that buyers are looking for homes. We know that's what they want. So, Mr. Homeowner, have no fear that if you don't offer compensation, that somehow buyer agents are going to boycott you. First off, aside from it being unethical and probably illegal, it just can't be done, because when a buyer wants to go see a home, and by the way, I don't want to leave it that it's well priced, that you do all the good things that you do as a listing agent, they are going to get there. I don't care if the buyer agent ties them up with ropes and chains, they're going to get to that listing. You can't stop it anymore. However, Mr. Seller, you do have another option. In the event a buyer agent calls me and wants to present an offer and has been unsuccessful at getting their buyer to pay them for whatever reason, maybe the buyer doesn't have the money, maybe the buyer doesn't want to pay it, but there is still an option where this buyer agent can ask you to pay them. It's not me paying. You are going to pay them directly. Now, if you're comfortable paying for the service that's being delivered, not to you, but to the buyer, you have that option. But however, we are not going to predetermine that number. We'll go to the buyer's agent and say, hey, yeah, my seller said, sure, we'll consider it. Present your offer, present your suggested compensation that you want us to pay, and we will reserve our decision based upon the price, terms, and conditions of your offer. Whether that's done on one offer or with multiple offers, it all comes back to the seller's net dollar benefit and who they believe is the best other terms and conditions that meet their needs. So this is a home run decision for listing agents, because the burden is off your shoulder to collect for somebody who You don't know who they are, and your seller can reserve the decision for compensation and even negotiation of compensation until they see the price, terms, and conditions of the offer. How good is that, at least for the seller at this point? I'm going to show you why it's great for the buyer too. But from the seller's perspective, why this lawsuit happened was because disconnection, decoupling, transparency, don't require the seller to fund it. All these things, again, if you've not been beaten down too much, and you would even agree in a right hypnotic state that this makes sense. This doesn't not make sense. So from the listing agent's perspective, this is a home run decision. If you're a listing agent in this business and you've been successful at charging premium commissions with splits, what I tell you to do, take a little bit of that split that you were giving out to an unknown buyer agent with an unknown offer, unknown terms, unknown prices. Take a little portion of that, add it back to your existing listing percentage, but you can't just ask for it. You got to give the seller some more value-added benefit for that. Now, why it's even better for listing agents is because we know the consumer dynamic has changed. Industry doesn't want to accept it. We know more and more buyers are going directly to listing agents. I mean, we know this. This is happening 30% of the time in markets all over the country. But if you're a listing agent, you always have had, but you can certainly say to the seller, hey, if you're okay with me representing both sides, and I'm going to explain to you how I can do it properly, we can do it one of two ways. I can ask the buyer for compensation and be paid accordingly, so that burden is off your shoulders. Or if the terms and conditions make sense, we can navigate it into our commission as well. In fact, we might be able to even market this listing as a listing where a buyer at least has the option of not even having to pay compensation, right? Totally legal, totally appropriate, totally okay. But what does that do? It puts the burden on buyer agents to create their value proposition, right? This is not the end of buyer agents. It's the end of bad buyer agents. Yes, bad buyers agents, you're done. You're done. But the good buyer agents are going to have to come up with their value proposition to show a buyer why it's worth it to have them as their representative rather than go to the listing agent, and what all of that value would look like, what all I'm going to do for you to justify either you paying me directly or we put it in the transaction. But I can't allow this putting it into the transaction thing go unspoken about, because this is what the industry is doing. By getting the seller or still working that narrative, it's still implying to a buyer, listen, you're not paying, I'm getting the seller to pay it. But hold on a second. Who is paying? And this is, again, there's another giant lawsuit out there. I don't want to talk about lawsuits, but it's the Baton lawsuit, Batton. This is where people are suing buyer agents for lack of transparency. And, there's a whole group of class action people who are looking to get the money back that their buyer agent earned, because when they bought the house, the buyer agent never told them what they were making. And the argument is that, hey, I'm the buyer. I paid it in the price. In fact, even though you got 2.5% from the listing agent, I paid way more than 2.5%, because not only did I buy that house for 2.5% more, I financed it. I put it in fact, over the next 30 years, that 2.5 is going to be 5.5, and I want 5.5. I mean, I don't want to go there, but buyers, if it's packed into the transaction, they're totally paying it. I think it's an easy extraction to make. So again, when a buyer for the first time hears from a buyer agent that there's two options, I can write you a check out of my own pocket, you're my buyer agent, or you're going to somehow put it into the transaction, whether you're going to put it into the purchase price or put it into a seller concession. Now, just so a thing on the seller concession. If you're thinking that your buyer agent commission is going to somehow be preserved inside of a seller concession, understand there's going to need to be full disclosure to the buyer that they're not buying that house for $500,000. They're buying that house for $515,000, and the $15,000 is going to come back to you as your fee. So the buyer's going to So wait a minute, let me get this. I can't buy that listing for 5. I got to buy it for 515. That means I'm going to finance it, which means over time, again, there's going to be different clarity. So it's not going to be that easy. I know everyone thinks it's going to be, it's not, because buyers are going to understand for the first time what that concession really means. Now, we know there was always a concession allowance for closing costs, which was allowed by lenders. This whole concession thing is a lender decision. This is not an NAR decision. But I can tell you right now that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA, and they're all sitting in their think tanks, deciding whether or not they're going to even allow the buyer agent commission to be included in the concession. There is no guarantee that's going to happen. In fact, many advocates of this lawsuit have said, listen, if you do that, all you're doing is the same thing that you were doing before. It's still a seller concession. It's still being paid by, they want to disallow it. So understand that this reality, this new way of doing things is, it's going to be done with the lights on. And providers, and when I say providers, I mean buyer agents and listing agents, have to now navigate with these lights completely on. But on the buyer side of the equation, this is going to be a challenge. So again, this rule of the seller still being able to offer compensation, even though it's outside of the MLS, understand that the DOJ and the FTC have still not reached a conclusion whether they even want to allow that. Now, I don't think it's all that unlikely. People much smarter than me give it a 50-50 call that they're going to completely sever any compensation from the seller to the buyer. And again, you hear a lot of the narratives out of the industry. This is illegal. This is communism. We're going to take this to the Supreme Court. All of that screaming and yelling doesn't matter. Once they do it, it's done. There's no retracting it. So I would prepare for that reality as well, because what are you going to do as a buyer's agent if there is no ability to get compensation from the seller? And I'm going to tell you, a lot of sellers are going to sit back and say, you know what, let's see what happens. Now, think about the dilemma it places on buyer's agents. Just think about this come July. You have a buyer who wants to go see a property. You meet with that buyer in your consultation. They sign the agreement. They agree to your commission. They can't pay. They go, listen, you're worth 3%, 2%, you got it. Only thing is, I'm not going to write you a check for it. If you can somehow put it into the transaction, if you can somehow get it from the seller, good luck to you. And now you go ahead, you submit now you call the realtor. You say, hey, listen, are you paying compensation? Realtor says, listen, submit it. And you submit it. Now what happens? The seller says, I love the offer. There's only one thing I don't agree with. I'm not going to pay for any compensation. Well, you said you'd pay something. No, we didn't agree to it. We said, let's see it. We've decided, no, we're not going to do it. I'm the buyer's agent now. Now I got to call back my buyer. Hey, how you doing? Great. Listen, seller, loved you. They loved you. They thought you had the cutest baby. However, the seller is just not willing to pay me. Now, what's the buyer going to do? So buyer says, what? So what does that mean? Seller says, well, according to my agreement, I guess you can't buy this house. How do you think that's going to go over? Do you think we're going to be able to continue to be seen well in the eyes of consumers if they're getting locked into these agreements and for somehow the commission can't be negotiated? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Right? Buyer says, well, I agreed to pay $510, but the seller isn't going to accept. So hold on a second. The seller might agree to the number, but he's just not agreeing to pay. So now I'm a buyer, and the seller has already agreed to sell this house for $510. It was listed for $500. I offered $510, but $10 going to my agent, but now my agent can't work it out. I'm the buyer. I've already agreed to pay $510. Does a buyer care whether or not that $10,000 goes to their agent or goes to the seller? My point is, you're establishing a price. Buyers are not going to be left locked out of homes because agents have contractually bound people to pay things, and if it doesn't work out, this is the challenge behind the buyer agency business going forward, in my opinion. It's going to be a very murky land. And if you're going to get, now again, you might be able to get a listing agent to commit to a number. Listen, I'm charging my buyer 2%. Can you pay me 2%? And let's say that listing agent says, yeah, you give my seller, yeah, well, but again, that would be a bad listing agent who's revealing numbers. Now, who you're really working for, right? You're working against your client. Smart listing agents, the smart ones, will, again, our obligation is to net our sellers the most money. And so the more revealing you are, and I know while you think, but again, if you're thinking about commission first, my client second, welcome to the world of ethical challenges, and you'll live in that world. But the good agents, remember, their goal is to win for their client. Their client is their seller. So in a situation, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to navigate these solutions on the buyer agency side of the equation. So what does this mean? This means, do I believe that buyer agency is dead? No, but here's what I think is going to happen. I think you probably all have to agree. Buyer agent commissions are going to fall because there's competition. I would even make the argument that efficiency is going to go up. Think about that. Imagine if prices fall and efficiency goes up. That's what free markets do. Now, I don't know. Prices may fall and efficiency goes down. There's lots of buyer agents out there who are screaming, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. There's no way that listing agents are going to be able to do both sides. I don't know. I know lots of great listing agents who do both sides, and they do it ethically. And I think one of the new skill sets that a lot of agents are going to have to learn how to do, and it's not really about ethics, it's about knowing how to navigate both people properly. One of the biggest misconceptions in the real estate business is that, hey, how can you have a fiduciary to a seller and have a non-fiduciary to a buyer and treat people fairly and honestly and ethically? My statement to you is, how do you think anything other than that? One of the most misconstrued perspectives in our business is the concept of fiduciary. There are realtors who believe that if you have a fiduciary to one party and a non-fiduciary to the other person you represent, that you somehow have a license to steal from that party. There is a perspective that if you don't have a fiduciary with people, that you have the ability to work against them, to treat them. No, you as a listing agent or a buyer's agent, if you have a fiduciary to your client, what does that mean? It means you have a legal obligation of trust. And if you violate it, the client can sue you for misrepresentation, fraud, and fiduciary violations. If you don't have a fiduciary with somebody you represent and you hurt them, they will sue you for misrepresentation, fraud, and they just can't sue you under some fiduciary statutes. Either way, if you do them wrong. So the concept that there's winners and losers with fiduciaries and non-fiduciaries in ethically represented relationships, and it's just untrue. And you've got to go to your leadership and say, listen, don't just give me what you think, show me the law. Most attorneys, if you push them, they'll absolutely understand it. They get it. They understand what fiduciaries and non-fiduciaries do, but they also understand what representing people, when you represent your buyer or seller, even in I'm not talking about transaction brokerage. I'm talking about a representation in a non-fiduciary capacity, but you represent, you have to treat them as fairly as if almost they were a fiduciary. You can't use, if a buyer says to you, listen, I'll pay up to a certain amount of money, but don't tell the other side, and you tell the other side, they're going to, and they find out, you're as liable as if you had a fiduciary. There's no free lunch in representations unless you have a stated transaction brokers where there's no advice you give. You're simply a transaction broker. You don't have to be that. So the good news is that as a listing agent, and if you start prospecting for listings and you start getting listings, what might happen? We might start to see, I think we will see buyer agency representations decline. However, this business has always been measured on sides. I did 4 buy sides, 6. I believe, and I think a lot of people think, it's just going to become a transaction. And just like loan officers represent lenders and consumers, one person, 2 sides. Insurance brokers represent insurance agencies and consumers. There are lots of industries where one person represents 2 sides successfully. And we already know it's done successfully on the listing side. I think that as an agent, You will have to learn how to navigate expectation with buyers and sellers, how to be transparent with them, how to navigate the negotiations. These are going to be new skill sets that can be done absolutely with ethics, with morals, and with proper guidance, okay? It's done. It can be done. It's not to say that a seller won't want that. And if a seller says to you, listen, I just don't feel comfortable with you representing a buyer, and then you will be able to say to the homeowner, no problem. Then I will make sure that if a buyer wants to engage, they will have to go find a buyer agent to present the offer. And there will be no shortage of buyer agents that will do that at all sides of the economic spectrum. And there's one other entity that I can tell you has already emerged as an entity that will serve and work in place of a buyer's agent. And you guys know who that is, Mr. and Mrs. Esquire, the lawyers. Many lawyers have already smelled the blood. And they go, hey, listen, I'm only getting $1,400 to represent a buyer on, and after all, I do all the work anyway, which we know isn't true. But many of these attorneys who are exempt from going through the licensing requirement will end up probably start representing buyers and submitting offers on their behalf. Now, I'm saying, does this replace all the value of a buyer's agent? But you know what? Maybe the world will shape up where buyer agents will do a certain set of things, and maybe when it comes to the offer, it will go to somebody else. The point is that the free market will emerge. What will end up being the best solution? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But if you're hanging on to yesterday and you're hanging on to, hey, I really don't need to worry because I'm worth every single dollar of my value as a buyer's agent, and I'll be able, they can still offer compensation. I think if you're hanging on to that, you're hanging on to yesterday. It's a major mistake. Pivot today. If you've never been focused on prospecting for listings, now's the day to do it. If you're a buyer's agent, and let's face it, there's a lot of listing agents who earned a nice chunk of money representing sellers and a nice chunk of money representing buyers. You know what? That side of your business now might be under a new world, so you have to pivot and readdress. Now, on the buy side of the business for a second, I think that there is one value added benefit. I believe that a buyer might pay a premium commission, these lofty 2% and 3% numbers, in one particular scenario. And that's, I believe, for the house hunter. I think that if your buyer agency agreement includes, or maybe only speaks to, hire me to go find you a house that's not on the market, meaning that pay me a fee of X, and that fee will be determined up front. And if I go find you a house that's not on the open market, that's not on the MLS, I basically go out house hunting for you and I find you what you're looking for, you will agree to pay me a certain level of compensation for do that. In my view, I think that does have some tangible value to a buyer. I think that kind of can make sense to some degree. If I'm going to write a check for something that I can't find on my own, I can't find while sitting in bed at night, scrolling through, I'm like, yes, that to me has some benefit. But remember, these are going to have to be predetermined up front. You're going to have to make sure that you get these things done in advance. And we're going to see all kinds of things change on that. One buyer agent who does this wants to propose. It was an interesting question. He goes, listen, Scott, what if I do this and I don't get paid? Well, you have an agreement, but with this particular buyer's agent said, listen, he's going to ask for a portion of his buyer fee to be held in escrow. And if he succeeds, the money's in place. Doesn't succeed, the money gets returned. I mean, again, legal, not legal. The point is, this is what evolution does. This is what ingenuity does. It comes up with ways to figure out things on the buy side. So I think on the buy side, that where the premium might be, but I think on the other side, we're going to see, and again, another interesting point. I asked this question every single time. I was in a meeting, it was 180 agents. I asked everybody in the room, who here would show and run a buyer around and know they're getting 3%? Every single agent raised their hand. 180 hands went up. I kept on bringing it down. I went to 2.5. Everyone's hand stayed up. Went to 2, bunch of hands went down. I went to 1.5. I got all the way down to 0.25%. And there were 31 hands still up. And who were these 31 people? These were not bad people. These were not, you get what you pay for people. These were people who said, you know what? $3,000, 2,000, that's not bad money. I mean, their lifestyle maybe. So we always assume, and this is what you hear from the industry, which is infuriating. Oh, those agents are going to be the bad ones. Hold on a second. We all know there's a lot of bad agents that charge 3%. I mean, commission doesn't define whether you're good or bad. Somebody just might have a lifestyle, you know? Some of you might be driving a Ferrari. Somebody else might be driving something else they don't need. So the idea is, let's not condemn people or business entities that can figure out a way to do something maybe even more efficiently than maybe even some of the other players. So the idea is that it's absolutely a great time for good and great agents. For good and great agents, this is the best thing that could have ever happened to you. Because one of the other things which is so interesting in the real estate business is what I call the acceptance of the worst. Everybody on this call knows with certainty that there is a very, very large percentage of people in this business who are not in this business as a career. They're not professional. These are things that aren't just admitted by agents. These are admitted by the leadership. By the leadership. There are leaders and brokers who I know who say to me behind closed doors, you know what? Half of my office is horrible. I'm like, why do you keep them? You know why they've kept them? Because there's never been any downside, right? What's the downside? I'm paying for the desk anyway, but there's been a huge downside. Because what it does is it's always diluted the best. And those are the agents who every now and then would trip over something and get something and would take it away from the good ones. I believe that those agents are the ones who are going to be I don't even want to say the casualty of this situation, but probably the necessary purging of this. If the industry admits that 30, 40, 50% of the people are no good, why do we keep them? Well, because that was the business model, right? How many business models have emerged over the years in the business where people measured success by how many agents they had in their company, right? I see companies, that's the only thing you see. 147,000 agents. That's the only thing you see. You don't see anything else. Just everyone measures on agents. But when you look at quality of service, net dollar benefits to clients, better experiences, you rarely, if you ever see that, because the industry measures it. It's like they're addicted. The industry's been addicted to recruiting rather than be addicted to consumer benefit. Be addicted to consumer value. If that's your new addiction, go to rehab for that rather than this addiction to recruit. And that addiction to recruit, I think, has come full circle. And I think that that's going to be the casualty of war. But it's not going to be the casualty. It'll be the casualty for them. It's going to be the good thing for the good agent. The good agent is going to be the winner in this thing. The consumer is the winner in this thing, because sellers will either agree to some offer of compensation if they want to, but they're not going to agree to it until they know what their number is going to look like, which makes sense. And by the way, if they don't agree to an offer of compensation, this argument that somehow the value, they're going to sell their house for less because buyer agents aren't going to bring buyers. Buyer agents are going to boycott it. Buyer agents are going to steer their buyers to the listings that give compensation, like the buyer has no say in that matter, right? They're going to not buy the house of their dreams, so you can steer them to a listing that ain't going to happen. But if the buyer does decide to go directly to, the seller is now in a position to either not have to pack in that extra percent. Maybe the buyer might buy the house cheaper, but let's just say the seller doesn't want to do that. And the seller wants to keep that 2 or 3%. Remember, that 2 or 3% was going somewhere. You know where it wasn't going? In the pocket of the asset owner. The asset owner was never getting it. But could that seller maybe enjoy, and maybe as part of their ROI, as part of their return, get that extra money? Who's to say that that would not happen? And if we looked at the case, they proved in court that agents and houses that sold with 2 agents versus 1 agent, There was almost no difference in market values. So what does that tell you? You know what it tells you? It tells you that consumers kind of watch the market. Sometimes they're watching it even more than realtors. Consumers know they have more tools today to know values. You think a buyer needs a realtor under contract to know what to offer on a property? They don't need that. They can get tools, they can find out tons of information. If I'm a seller and I want to know what my house is worth, I can invite 9 realtors over and get 9 listing presentations. And after 9 conversations, I probably have a good idea of what my house is worth. And I don't even have to sign a listing agreement. Sellers aren't signing listing agreements because somehow you are all about the value. You're part of something else. It's not about just the value. And one of the things I'd love you to start thinking about as real estate agents in the new world is stop being associated with market value and start being associated with net dollar benefit. I believe realtors don't really control top line numbers. I think the market will take care of itself. But we all know that there's a difference between market or what your house might be listed at, what it might sell at, and what it might end up with at closing, right? We know that things change along the transaction highway. What agent has strategies and solutions and tools to what I call preserve net dollar, to preserve the wasteful and often unfortunate giving up of money along the transaction highway? So I would challenge you to think about creating and infusing what I call net dollar strategies, things that are done for sellers that are not typically done in a transaction today. Like, again, I've got many of them, but one of the things, and those of you that know me, I've been talking about it for years, for a seller to list their house without doing a home inspection before they list it, to me, is just foolish. It's foolish. It's foolish because we've known for 50 years that buyers renegotiate transactions after that inspection is done, but they don't do it dollar for dollar. They do it 3 for $1. We know this, but what do we do as listing agents? We throw our sellers into transactions and talk to sellers about the arranging of these, what I call risk reduction activities, and start doing things for sellers that puts them in a position of financial advantage, not only, at the beginning, but throughout the transaction. These are the reasons why sellers will pay premiums to listing agents, because of unique solutions and tools that they simply have not heard of before, or maybe they've never been exposed to. This is where all the value of what we do exists. If you think your value as a realtor is doing a CMA, returning phone calls 24/7, putting it on the MLS, doing a social media video, distributing it, syndicating it, doing your cringy, slow motion dance on the deck in front of the pool, if you think that's your value proposition in this business, you're out of business. I know it appears it's going away. The value are much more detailed transactional solutions for people. The one thing that listing agents and the good ones, and even the good buyers agents, you need to raise your level of financial literacy. Most listing agents, their education on the financial side of their business doesn't go beyond a pre-approval letter. You don't even know what a pre-approval letter is behind it. You don't know how to unpack it. You don't know how to unpack a buyer's true ability to perform. You don't go deeper with that. If you really want to get more money for your sellers with a buyer, unpack in detail their true, transparent financial circumstances with respect to everything, because it's the variance. You could have 2 buyers with the exact same offer, but buyer A has maybe a more complicated financial circumstance than buyer B. Doesn't mean we're going to remove buyer A, but maybe we want to negotiate more money because we have a better understanding of their financial hurdles, but we know their solutions and answers. And if we're going to negotiate more money for our seller, we're going to do so not because we just want it, but because the financial transparency of the client became unveiled, and we, with knowledge and with transparency, and by the way, with the buyer's acceptance of their difficulty, we were able to do things. So being a true financial literate agent. And I say this, you can do this on your own. You should all be doing this. Your mortgage partnerships, please don't use mortgage companies because they bring you bagels and donuts and locks. That's a good thing too. But what I would probably recommend is use financial partners who bring much more to the table for you. You should not go on a listing without a loan officer. I'm talking a listing. Every listing you go on, you should demand that your loan officer goes with you. Why? Because when people list their homes, it's as much of a mortgage decision as it is a sale. In fact, sometimes it's more. Many of these sellers, most real estate agents don't even go down the path of financial literacy with their homeowner. They don't even go there. But hey, you want to bring value? There are so many ways to bring value to your listing relationship with your sellers. It's an endless opportunity. On the buyer side, while I'd love to tell you, there's lots and lots and lots of things you can do to bring value, and I just am here to say to you that you can have that value proposition. I think there is a big giant question mark whether a buyer is going to see it in the same. And I've had a lot of very, very successful agents, very successful buyer agents say to me, Scott, you know what? This whole thing behind negotiating, I know I say I negotiate for my clients, but at the end of the day, what am I really? When I'm in a bidding war, yeah, I like to put my best foot forward. I like to make the offer really neat and clean. And, I give a pre-approval letter chiseled on a stone tablet and, all those puffery things. But even some of the best agents in this country have said, you know what? At the end of the day, I spend a lot of time with buyers. I just don't know how much value I bring. Now, I've had some agents say to me, I'm going to put this on social media. You will laugh hysterically when you see this. This agent said it with absolutely no reservation. He said, Scott, the reason why I charge and why buyers should pay me $15,000 is because do you know how many buyers I have to work with before I get one? I might have to work with 20 buyers before I get one. And I go, so the buyer who you sell to is basically paying for all that work? Absolutely. Somebody's got to pay. Someone's got to pay. And I'm going to get paid. But this is, and by the way, this person that said it to me is leadership. This is leadership saying these things. So what we want to hopefully take away from this, and I hope, and I would love you to start being part of our industry that stops this grim reaper doom and gloom. This is horrible. This is communism. This is the government telling me what to do. And be advocates for the consumer. Put yourself on the consumer. How can you? It's almost unfathomable to hear these agents out there in a public forum talking about how bad this is. Everyone gets it. They know you're not thinking about them. I know you say you are. You're thinking about yourself. I've had an agent go almost to battle with me, explaining that, listen, I'm worth every dollar to my buyer. And I go, well, why don't you just get them to pay it? And would not accept it. No, the seller should pay it. I'm helping that seller with my buyer because so many buyers agents are, can't even accept the fact that yes, you're of value, but somebody else needs. It's almost like falling on deaf ears. So I think it's a great opportunity. Get on side of the. If you want to start doing some great social media posts, get on board with clients. Show consumers how it's good for them, and then figure out your way on how to maximize your revenue as a result of that. And there's many ways to do it on the listing side. Again, prospecting outside your sphere. As we sit here right now, there is somebody wanting to list their home. And I call it the 5 verticals. You've got the for sale by owner. You've got the expired listing. You've got the short sale, pre-foreclosure seller. You've got the landlord who owns a 1 to 4 family property. And you've got a homeowner. Those are the 5 buckets of listing opportunity that, quite frankly, the top 1% in this industry gets. They know that they sit in those office meetings and they look around at you guys and they know, half of those people, they're not going to go out and prospect. And they go out and they win these opportunities because half, if not more than the office is sitting home waiting for the phone to ring. There's a psychology in this business that you can either wait for your client to call or you can create a client. The top 1% in this business, they don't wait for clients, they create clients. And this is the opportunity of the century to go out there and get clients, because you know what? We've already seen a 30% reduction in the real estate membership fees, and that's even before this case was decided. All this means is you guys got less competition. And I would even make the argument, and those that know me, I don't believe that there's really any competition anyway. I mean, I live in Monmouth County. I think there's 13,000 realtors in Monmouth County, New Jersey. I would tell you there's a handful that go out there and prospect. There's 13,000 agents, but I'm going to tell you 12,950 are probably sitting home watching Judge Judy or The Price is Right. They're not prospecting for business. You don't have to be better than 13,000 in your market. If you're calling me from Wichita, Kansas, and there's 12 agents in your market, I'm going to tell you 10 of them are not prospecting. You have no competition. And even in this change, there's going to be some buyer's agents that will be able to get over the river. There will be some buyer's agents that will be able to convert themselves and transition. But there's going to be a lot that won't be, because being a listing agent requires a different psychology method. Remember, when you take a buyer out, they're looking at you to help them show home. When you're on a listing appointment, you are selling nothing other than one big giant promise. It's all conceptual. You're selling nothing. It's, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. There's nothing tangible there. It's all one big promise. It's one big, idea. And not a lot of people are good at selling ideas, right? If it's not tangible, they can't do it. But if you're somebody who can do that, and by the way, it's so much fun to do that. Like, it's so great to be able to do that, because once you can do that, nobody owns you. The good listing agents, and I know there's some great listing agents on this call, they go to sleep every night. They're in REM sleep. They sleep like a baby. You know why? Because they know on Monday morning when they get up, they're going to be able to go out there and sell themselves and get opportunity and get listings. They don't care if the market's up, the market's down, rates are 7%, 4%. All these buyers agents running around going, oh, they're waiting, they're hoping, they're praying for Jerome Powell to lower, they're praying for a 5% interest rate. Can you imagine being in a business where you're waiting for the market to create action for you? I mean, how defeating is that? You're either going to let the market do it for you or do it for yourself. You don't have to wait for interest rates, because every market, when it comes to selling a house, there are sellers who absolutely need to sell. There are sellers who absolutely want to sell. Are there sellers who, maybe, maybe not? Yes. But every market has the need tos and the really want tos. Why not be in that business? On the buyer side, you might have a buyer who needs to buy a house, but there just may not be any for them to buy. What do you do with that? Sit and wait. Do you know how many agents have complained about lack of inventory? There's no inventory. There's no inventory. The world in which you want to be in is go out there and create your inventory. If you've got no inventory, go create it, rather than sit like most agents waiting for it. That's the loser mentality. The winner mentality is go out there and create your inventory. And you know what? You could do it at the end of this phone call. The end of this call, everybody can go out there, and by 5 o'clock Eastern time, somebody on this call can get a listing and make, as a listing agent, $30,000 by 5 o'clock. There are people in this country who have to work all year. They don't make $30,000. We have earned so much money. This commission on the buyer side, it's gotten so distorted. Can you imagine in markets where there's $600,000 and $700,000 houses, agents for less than 2%, I won't show it. Seriously? You'll do it for 14,000, but you won't do it for 12.5? No. It's almost like, but this is what the industry, and I say the industry, I blame leadership. The leadership has allowed this to permeate in our business. Listen, I've been doing this for 60 years. I am 60 years old. I grew up in a family real estate company. Okay. When they talk about the cartel, this industry is like, we were the cartel. I was Scarface. Okay. I get how it works. It was great. Believe me, there was a time, and most of you don't even remember this, that if a buyer wanted to buy a house in San Francisco, they had to call an agent and go, are there any houses for sale in San Francisco? And the buyer would have to wait 4 days if they were lucky to get a. we are in such a different world right now. So why is it that so many have not evolved? I think, again, it goes to this toxic recruiting thing that I think has hurt us. And I think that hopefully we will move from a headcount business to a quality provider. And I think, and I hope that everybody in this call is inspired to go out and speak this perspective. Let the consumer know that you really are an advocate for them. And again, between now and July, good luck. You'll get some buyers. You'll put those deals in contract. You'll get that listing fee that's already predetermined. But you know what? Start thinking about what tomorrow's going to bring. And by the way, there might be a buyer agents out there who might be very happy working for some small number. And instead of selling one home and making a commission, I might have to sell 4. But if you like doing that, then go ahead and do it. This is where creativity and ingenuity will explode. There's maybe an agent out there that's going to work on an hourly wage, and they're going to convert their business to an hourly wage. And yeah, they're not going to be making $7,000 on a transaction, but they'll make $3,000 by the hour. And they know that when they went out and sat for 2 hours in the rain, at least they were getting paid. To some people like that, right? There's going to be all different kinds of places. So with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions, comments that anybody might share.
You want me to rapid fire a few questions?
Go ahead.
Off? There's some direct messages here too. So for you, Scott, will you be able to develop a script for buyers agents to receive a 5-figure commission for doing traditional buyer agent activities? For example, coordinating, seeing and accessing properties, writing and negotiating the offers, settling up and attending inspections, suggesting mortgage, title, insurance,
yes,
etc. Is there
my answer?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I got to believe in it.
Yep.
If I believed that doing those things were worth 10,000, 12,000, I can't look my clients in the eye and honestly think that has long-term value and benefit. So I don't.
Okay. Could you please explain your opinion that it is unethical to tell a seller that their chances of selling improve if they pay a buyer agent a larger incentive-sized commission? Yes. If this is actually how the market works, then how is informing the seller of this fact unethical?
First off, it's not a fact. That's an opinion. And if you read the Code of Ethics, which most realtors who are and have some point in their career read the Code of Ethics, and they've read the rules of real estate agency, there is a very clear directive that says commission shall not be used as any tool of inclusion or exclusion on the transaction of real estate, which means that if a buyer wants to see a home and there's not enough commission in it for you, you're bound ethically to do nothing to discourage that buyer from seeing it. That's just the rules you signed up for.
Very good. Can you pre-negotiate a dual agency commission at time of listing?
Yes. Absolutely. Now, again, in terms of the buyer side, you can say to the seller, I'm going to charge the buyer 1, and the buyer could come to you and not want to pay the 1, but now you're kind of in a position of control based upon the best net dollar result for your client to negotiate that. You might negotiate that away. You'll have every option. Just like you were able to reduce your commission to a seller for whatever reason you deemed you needed to do, you'll be able to do the same thing for the buyer.
Is there any risk of presenting the idea to sellers now to list 0% buyer agent compensation with the clause in agent notes, seller will review and consider buyer agent compensation? Or what should the agent note say?
So my understanding is the rules aren't clear yet, is the MLS is not going to allow you to make any suggestion or recommendation of compensation. There's going to be 0. So first question is, you can put out 0 today. In terms of the narrative of what you're going to populate, there is discussion as we speak right now on how agents will be able to do that. They've already decided, at least as part of the settlement, that you can't use any kind of MLS data. You can't try to subvert the MLS, right? There's this concept that, hey, if I get the seller to offer 2% and I put it on some website or I do something else to subvert it, that I can get away with it, it's not going to fly. However, so the rules aren't clear yet on how you can kind of promote that. But what you can do is you can verbally say it. So when a buyer agent calls you and says, hey, is there any compensation in it for me because I can't get it from my buyer? You can say, I discussed it with my seller. They have suggested they would be willing to consider it. Present an offer. You see, the thing is it can't be predetermined, right? Now we're right back to the same old thing, right? Why offer two if you don't even know what it is? Why would a seller do it? Remember, the idea is, why is a seller? If you fundamentally believe, and a guy like me can't convince you, if you fundamentally believe that you need to do this, then you'll do it. But the fact is, and agents and top people across, I mean, there have been people, I mean, many people in my orbit, we've been offering 0 to no commissions forever. Selling bidding wars, everyone shows up, no one doesn't do it. So the idea is that somehow something's going to work out better for your seller by offering out the money. It's been debunked. Yes, you might have the opinion it does, but there's no data to support that.
When will these new NAR laws come into effect? Have they been approved and finalized?
It is anticipated that in July. I don't know, there's a date specific, but the MLSs have to retool all of their technology, because remember, they're going to be taking out the buyer agent commission, block, as well as some other things. So there's a retooling. There's new forms that need to be created. So basically, there's a collective understanding by July. Everybody should be ready, and it's going to go into effect.
John, you got a question?
Scott, if you have sellers now that asking you to do zero buyer's agent commission, but you want to let the community know that they're open to that they want to see offers. I mean, from now until July, doesn't it make sense to put something in the notes? Otherwise,
again, what I would do, John, is I would get a directive from your broker and the board that you can put those in the notes.
Right.
Not convinced you can. Remember, the MLS system is very fractured around the country. So every MLS board does things differently. And sometimes
Right.
two people at the same MLS and to get two different answers. So I would really take direction as to whether or not that can be done. But remember, if it was me, I'd be putting out 0 today.
Yeah.
Again, and the reality is, John, buyer agents are going to call you. They're going to say, hey, listen, because remember, buyers aren't searching for homes. Or searching for agents. Agents, they're waiting for the call to come in. So the agent will call you and they'll say, hey, John, listen, this listing, it's great. It meets my buyer's needs. I know we're in a new world here. I see, there's 0 there, but hey, listen, if we submit an offer and it's enough for the seller to pay, can we do it? You can say, sure.
Yeah.
Do it. They go, well, John, how much can I get my 3%? What would you say? Is there 3% for Poppy here? What do you think? Can I get my 3?
No, I would just say propose whatever you have on your buyer agency agreement, right?
Propose it, and we'll let you know.
Right.
Well, John, how do I know? I mean, listen, you're working for your seller. Your job
Right.
is, and again, I don't want to think negatively, but if for some reason this agent can't reconcile this thing with the buyer, what might the buyer do?
Oh, then he's going to come directly to me. But that's not what I want.
That.
No, I don't want that. I don't want my phone to blow up with I don't want to be the first guy in the.
But remember, we want our seller to be victorious.
Right.
So if that buyer agent, for whatever reason, ethically, unethically, whatever, they can't do it, that option exists for your seller needs to understand that the blocking, the ownership of consumers that we sometimes say, it's just not there. And I just think that with that narrative to people, the right thing will happen. Either the buyer agent will resolve it, work it out. And if not, well, do we want to will our seller be denied the opportunity to sell their house? And I think the collective answer is no.
No, I know. Okay.
And I get you with the blow up. Believe me, John, I've been eviscerated. But the funny thing about it is, is a very small percentage of people have eviscerated me. I mean, I've gotten everything. I mean, I haven't gotten any death threats yet. Please, nobody give me one. But I've been, but again, it's a very small percentage of all the notes and emails and calls I get. 2% are nasty. 98% are, you know what? And again, I'm telling you things that your broker probably hasn't told you. I mean, a lot of brokerages, I've gotten a lot of phone calls from angry brokers calling me, how dare you? Yeah. I'm just trying to be transparent.
Can you ask for additional percentage if buyer comes to you from seller as dual agency, like an addendum to the listing agreement?
So if, let's say, the seller is willing to pay one, can I get an additional one from the buyer? The answer is yes. So you can earn from both sides. So if you want to try to get more money from the seller or more money from the buyer, you have every right to do it or ask for it. Sure.
And what should you say to a seller who is expecting these changes to happen now?
I would say to the seller, listen, good news. Good news is that for many, many years, you were the funding requirement for the buyer side. The good news is that normally this market held let's just say, hypothetically, a 5% commission market. Most listings were at 5. The good news is it's not 5 to you. It's only 3 to you.
Very good.
Really? Yeah. Well, what about, and then you say, listen, the good news is that buyer agents, and it's becoming, and by July it will be the law, but between now and then we could try to take advantage of it. And if you've got a great listing that's is going to get a bidding war because you've priced it right, let's not leave that out of the equation. You've got to be a good listing agent. You've got to do all the things that are fundamentally correct. You can't be a bad listing agent and think that this is going to benefit you. If you're a bad listing agent and you do, it's not going to help you. If you're a good listing agent, if you're a good pricing strategist, if you do all the right things to get your listing marketed and sold properly, believe me, you'll be the winner.
Quick technical question. Have you used any phone dialer systems to get those expireds and FSBOs numbers to go after these listings? If yes, do you have any recommendations since there's plenty of them out there?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, there are so many dialer systems out there. I mean, the Vulcan. I mean, I generally tend not to like to give them because dialer systems and CRMs and transaction management systems, they're like ice cream. Some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla. So I say most of these dialer systems, they have free trial periods. Take advantage of them. See what you're comfortable with. See which ones integrate with your CRM or don't. There's a lot of variables that go into the equation when it comes to dialer systems. So again, I would take advantage of those free trial offers that the dialer systems provide and see which one, fits best.
I had a DM. It is my understanding that both a buyer and seller may not compensate an agent in the same transaction.
Incorrect. Those are certain state requirements. Like, for example, in New Jersey, you can't do it. There's, I think, 4 states in the country where an agent is not allowed to get money from both sides. 40 some odd states allow it. My understanding is that both in Trenton and some of these other legislative areas, they are looking to change. That will change. So buyer agents those states that don't have it will fall into place rather quickly with the rest of the country to receive compensation on both sides.
Okay. What about dual agency when buyer agent is in your office?
Yeah, well, again, the definition of dual agency is usually within the company, right? So dual agency is defined not by you, the individual, but by the office. So dual agency scenarios, do exist within your office.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you please explain if you have 4% listing internally in your office and someone in your office has a buyer, how are they compensated?
Same way. It's the same way. So if there's a 4% fee that's again, now, you can't self-deal, right? So you're not going to be able to take a 4% listing and then offer 2% to your agents as compensation. It's going to be, it's going to be defined. So again, there are a lot of brains out there trying to figure out ways to game the system. I've heard lots of different ideas on people how they're going to try to do these workarounds. The one thing that you have to understand about this case, about this firm, and about the people watching these things, they understand the business. These are people who understand the nuances of the business. They understand how things are done. So if you're kind of thinking up some way to concoct some workaround scenario, that's going to be some genius concept, you might get away with it. I just don't, it's just not going to sustain itself. Remember, it's the practice. This case, the result of this case was not just a money judgment, it was a policy change. So the money, we see these hundreds of millions, but it's really about the policy that is the changing factor in this business. And so there's going to be very little workarounds.
This is an interesting question that's open to anybody that wants to chime in. Jennifer asked, wondering if any agents have had pushback from sellers who they have current listing agreements with looking to renegotiate.
I've heard of them. I've
Yes.
had many phone calls from agents who said, hey, I'm in a listing agreement with my seller currently. My seller saw something on the news. He wants to rip up this listing agreement and redo it with zero. Some agents have said absolutely. Some agents are fighting and saying, hey, you're in agreement. But again, how well is that going to go over? Seller just asks for a withdrawal. I mean, again, the days of, these lockups are only going to go so far. So I've absolutely heard of it, and it's much more rampant than you think. It's been quite frequent.
Sounds like this was a very productive session here. A lot of positive feedback. Jennifer said, just like every other industry, you have to adapt to change to survive. I'm actually glad I'm newer in this industry. I'm used to being agile. And thank you so much for all the great ideas.
Hey, let me tell you something. Newer agents have a big advantage over some of the seasoned veterans here. You don't have any tapes to rewrite, right? You're going out there with a blank slate. You're going out there. You can imprint a new way of doing things. So sometimes being a new agent, especially in new times, might actually be an advantage. Let me tell you something. I know some old codgers in this business. They are going to go down, kick. I got one guy, he's convinced this is going to end up at the Supreme Court. I go, do you not think our country has bigger problems to worry about than commissions? I mean, the Supreme Court? I mean, I don't know. I don't think the Supreme Court's going to hear it, but he's convinced. We're going to go right back. This is terrible. This is horrible. This is communism. They're taking food out of my family's. Nobody will change it. Shock therapy won't change that guy.
Right. All right. What happens if a listing agent is doing an open house and potential buyer walks into an open house and they decide to move ahead and buy it? How is the listing agent compensated?
So basically, so is the person sitting in the open house the listing agent? So if the listing agent, read the question again.
What happens if listing agent is doing the open house and potential buyer walks into the open house and they decide to move ahead and buy it? How is
so before, right? So what we'll do is before the buyer engages, you'll explain who you are. You'll say, listen, I'm the listing agent. If you would like to move forward and have me kind of take on a role, now you'll sell your buyer value. And the buyer will either say yes or no. You'll disclose that you represent the seller. Will the buyer care? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. If you can say, listen, I'll show you the house, but if you want to make an offer, you have every right to go out and find a buyer agent who meets your needs and whatever that might be. You never should be self-dealing, but that's how you would handle that scenario. Pretty easy.
Very good.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all.
Will they need to sign the buyer agency agreement at the open house?
Yes. Everything with a buyer will need to be in writing disclosed: price, your commission, your value proposition, and your term. Just like a listing agent.
Appreciate everybody tapping in.
I hope everybody enjoyed. If you did, again, go follow me at the Scott Einbinder Effect. Feel free to comment. No bad comments, hopefully good ones. Those of you that I know, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. And let's all be part of the solution rather than be the reinforcement of the problem. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, Scott.